Welcome back into another edition of Prime Sports World, and a very happy hump day from everyone here at Prime Sports World, as it is the day before the Independence Day here in America. So hopefully all are doing well. Hopefully all have the day off tomorrow. I unfortunately do not work in the media industry, so we have to work tomorrow. But on today's episode of the podcast, we're going to talk about the Atlanta Falcons and preview their season as they have a very interesting season coming up, a real shakeup in their roster. We're going to talk about all of it here on this episode of the Prime Sports World. And please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast as we break down every single team in the NFL before the season gets started. And if you are an Atlanta Falcons fan, you want to shoot the shit with me, David On Point Huffman, you're more than welcome to do so. I've shared the StreamYard link into all of the places. So come hang out with me, talk some Atlanta Falcons football. I'd love to have you on the show. But until then, please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. And let's not waste any time. Let's get right into the content. Let's talk about the head coaching hire. Obviously, they hired Raheem Morris to be the head coach of this football team. He leaves after Arthur Smith had, 2 seasons kind of lackluster coaching there. If you do remember, Raheem Morris was the interim coach there for the Atlanta Falcons for several years, or not for several years, just interim after they fired Dan Quinn. He was the head coach for the rest of the remainder of that season. He goes on to be the defensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, goes on to win a Super Bowl in that role. I think he actually was like defensive back coach when he won the Super Bowl because whoever their head coach is now was the head coach at the time, or the defensive coordinator at the time. And Raheem Morris, he really got a fair shake. When he was the first time head coach, when he was head coaching this team in Atlanta, the first time as the interim, it's good to see him get another chance in the NFL. When was that exactly? Hold on a second. Assistant head coach. So he was the defensive coordinator. Yeah. And then, he was the defensive coordinator for the Rams when they won their Super Bowl from 21 to 2023. My apologies. And then 2020, yes, he was the interim head coach. You go from Arthur Smith, got that offensive minded head coach, but the offense was very stagnant under Arthur Smith. They have all these playmakers on this team. Arthur Smith, also a 2-time NFL champion. One with the Rams, and he must have won that other one when he was a defensive back coach in Tampa Bay all the way back in 2002. So this is a guy who's been there, done that in the NFL. He's been a successful defensive coordinator. He's been a defensive back coach. He was also the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from 2009 to 2011. Not the greatest stint there with his head coaching tenure, 3-13, 10-6, and then 10-4. And then that lone season in Atlanta where he coached the final games there, the 11 games, 4-7 as a head coach, with really like a mismanaged roster there. But I think that's what you got to kind of do, right? When you go from a defensive minded head coach, you switch gears and go on to an offensive minded head coach. They have brought in Jock Smith to be the offensive coordinator. Let's see if I can find their offensive coordinator real quick on this internet real quick. It's going to take me a second. Sorry. Zach Robinson is the offensive coordinator of this football team. I admittedly don't know a lot about him. But I think that, Raheem Morris is a good guy. He's a very yes-man coach. He's very popular with the players. So Zach Robinson has been a coach since 2019. He was the assistant quarterback coach for the Rams before finally becoming the passing game coordinator this most recent season, and then upgraded to the offensive coordinator. So he's been around some good quarterback play there, and he should be, Kirk Cousins should be pretty familiar with him there. But yeah, I think Raheem Morris is the right guy for this job. I think he offers an opportunity to be something different, a little bit different than Arthur Smith, a little bit different voice in that locker room. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. Moving on to the second storyline, let's talk about best offensive team in the NFC. And I think the conversation can obviously be had. You look at their wide receiving core. I hope Darnell Mooney takes another step, bounces back from which was a pretty poor season last year. You trade for Rondale Moore. I mean, he had some explosive moments there in Arizona. You have Drake London. You have Bijan Robinson. You still have Tyler Algier. You still have the very talented Kyle Pitts. And not to mention, you have one of the best offensive lines in football. Caleb McCary, Chris Lindstrom, Matthew Bergeron, Jake Matthews round out a very solid offensive line. And then, of course, obviously, you brought Kirk Cousins in free agency. We're going to talk about free agency a little bit later in this show. But, I mean, Kirk Cousins was having an MVP-type season before he tore his Achilles tendon last year. If you could get the same value of Kirk Cousins as you did when we saw him last time, we saw him on the football field when he was beating the Green Bay Packers in that, was it week 6 or 7? Kirk Cousins can elevate the rest of the players on this roster. This should be one of the best offensive teams in the NFC. But when you're talking about NFC, I mean, you're looking at the Dallas Cowboys. What offense would you rather have next season, the Dallas Cowboys offense or the Atlanta Falcons? I'm going to hesitantly take the Falcons. Would you rather have Detroit's offense or this Falcons team? I'm going to take the Detroit Lions. I think that they have a better offense, at least weapons around their offense as well. Give me Detroit. I think they have a better offense than Green Bay. I think they have a better offense than Minnesota. Even us here in Chicago, I think they have a better offense than we do. And in their own division, I think they have the best offense in this division by far, even though I do like Tampa Bay and I do like that Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin connection that they have there. And then San Francisco, yeah, I think that's a better offense than the Atlanta Falcons. They're better than the Rams. They're better than the Seattle Seahawks, and they're better than the Arizona Cardinals. So I can't go any lower than the third best offense in the NFC. The other problem that I have with putting them higher than a lot of these other offenses, we haven't seen this offense play yet. It's hard to really say how good they're going to be when we haven't seen it. Bijan Robinson was suspected to be this all-generational type talent at the running back position. That didn't really pan out that season. He was okay, but really nothing super special over the top. So I think that's going to be, I think you'll have a hard time when we talk about the best offenses in the NFC. I think I still would rather have Detroit. I'd rather have San Francisco. And until I see it on paper, it's because games aren't won on paper. If games were won on paper, Dallas Cowboys would be the Super Bowl every single season. The Philadelphia Eagles would have gone to the Super Bowl last season. They had a really stacked lineup. I'm going to say they're the third best offense in the NFC, but I got to see it. I got to see it in person in order to really say that. And then how to handle expectations. I mean, the Atlanta Falcons the last couple seasons, basically since Matt Ryan was traded to the Indianapolis Colts 4 years ago now, I think it was 3 years ago. This Atlanta Falcons team hasn't really had expectations. Like if they made the playoffs, great. I mean, if they end up being one of the worst teams in the NFC, okay. I mean, that's kind of prior to the course. The quarterback play was kind of in flux. But now with Kirk Cousins here and this offensive and the weapons that they have and the way that this defense stacks up and the pieces they have with Jesse Bates and AJ Terrell, Mike Hughes has kind of been a freelancing corner for most of his career. But this is a defense this is a team, an Atlanta Falcons team that's going to have expectations going into this season. So I think how they handle, because teams are gonna they're not gonna be written off anybody's schedule now. They're aware of Atlanta. They're aware of what they have on the roster. It's going to be up to the head coach. It's going to be up to the players, especially Kirk Cousins, to kind of be like, hey, we're not going to be a darling star. We're not surprising anyone anymore. This Atlanta Falcons team is on a lot of teams' radar, and they're going to have to play with those kind of expectations. It's going to require good head coaching, good veteran leadership from players like Chris Lindstrom, Kirk Cousins, to really pull hey, we got expectations. We have to match those and meet those expectations. So Atlanta, yeah, how do you handle expectations? Veteran leadership. Let's swing into the draft. One of the most controversial picks in all of the draft in the entire 2024 NFL draft this most recent season was the pick of Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback out of Washington. It was really shocking. The fact that they just signed Kirk Cousins and then they go out in the first round and they take Michael Penix Jr. Now he might end up being amazing down the line, but you're in a win now mode. This is not a win now player, and I don't want to be the constant guy that kind of craps all over this pick, but it was not a good pick. There were other players on their board, edge rusher, Dallas. I'm going to pull it up. There were players on the defensive side of the football that could have helped this team next season. And whatever you think about Michael Penix Jr., he's not helping them next season. They just won't. That's not happening. So I'll see who that ends up playing out. I don't necessarily like the way the Falcons handled that situation. Man, what's going on with my browser right now? So I'm having a hard time clicking between stuff. The same thing happened to me yesterday when I was not solo. Yeah. So I was just trying to get through this so I can get through the. Okay, yeah, but I mean, they could have had many players that could have helped them, preferably on the defensive side of the football. They could have taken an edge rusher. So it's just not a good understanding of what you have on the draft board and what your team's built to do. They took a defensive tackle out of Clemson. He should play some considerable minutes snaps this season. He's 9.5 sacks in Clemson in defensive tackle, which is third in the ACC. He's got the prototypical size to play defensive tackle. You can also swing him out to the edge if you want to. He's a good player. Then you got Braylon Trice, the edge out of Washington. He had 16 sacks over 2 seasons while on the Washington Huskies. He also gets to reunite with his teammate Michael Penix Jr. I don't really know what that means exactly, but bringing those two guys back, fourth most sacks among Power 5 players in that stretch. He had 12 games with 5 or more pressures since the start of 2022, which led all FBS players over that same span. He can play outside linebacker. He can also play edge. That's a pretty solid pick. And then you got the kid out of Oregon, Brandon Dorlis, defensive tackle or defensive end. He had 699 press rushes at defensive tackle, 391 as the edge. He's kind of a do-it-all player, and this is the kind of defender that you expected the Falcons to kind of take in the first round. Like, they should have addressed their defense in the first round instead of waiting till round 4, even though this is a versatile player who had 5 sacks last season. And then, round 5, they took a linebacker. They took another running back out of Alabama to kind of give some depth there. Ran for 890 yards on 180 carries and 8 touchdowns last season. He's a workhorse running back and just, a change of pace back from what they got in Bijan Robinson. And they took a wide receiver out of Illinois, Casey Washington. TJ, we're on the show. You know all about him, but I don't really watch a lot of college football. But he is 6'2", 200 pounds. He is the prototypical size when he comes to wide receiver position. He's the second. He was tied for the second tallest wide receiver on the roster after top wideout Drake London. And then he took a defensive tackle out of Georgia, winning mentality, a guy who's come from a winning culture. You go into what is now hopefully a winning culture there in Atlanta, 6'6", 314 pounds. I don't know how much he's actually going to play or if he'll even make the roster. But this all hedges on what Michael Penix Jr. ends up being. I mean, if he ends up sitting for 3 seasons and Kirk Cousins, I just don't understand that first pick. I like for somebody to try to make sense of it, but I don't think you can. To free agency. Yeah, so big time roster shakeup here. Obviously, they brought in Kirk Cousins, traded away Desmond Ridder. They traded away they traded in Rondell Moore. Antonio Hamilton, the cornerback out of who played recently for the Arizona Cardinals, comes over. Calais Campbell is gone now after he's had a borderline. He's probably at a Hall of Fame. He's a Defensive Player of the Year award winner when he was a member of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Cordell Patterson's no longer on this team. A Swiss Army time who would have been very valuable with this new kickoff rule when it comes to the National Football League. Bud Dupree, who really hasn't been the same guy since he tore his ACL 3 seasons ago. And Jeffrey Okudah has bounced around in the NFL, has not really found a place for himself as he's just been a journeyman corner for the majority of his career since being the 4th overall pick by the Detroit Lions 5 years ago now, I think it was what it is. But I mean, Kirk Cousins, as long as Kirk Cousins comes back and he's healthy, he is going to improve this roster. This is kind of the conversation we've had about like the Colts for the last couple of seasons. Like, they've always felt like they're a quarterback away. This is the Atlanta Falcons team that's a quarterback away from being really competitive. Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, Kyle Pitts as your running back, as your tight end. I mean, this is one of the best offensive skill sets players that you had. What held them back last season was the quarterback play. It was abysmal for the majority of that tenure last season. Desmond Ridder or Tyler, give me a 6-pack of Heineke just weren't cutting it at the quarterback position, and they just couldn't get that consistency. Kirk Cousins should give you that. As long as he's able to fully rehab from that Achilles tear, he's a good slam dunk play, like plug and play guy. Darnell Mooney should be able to bounce back and revive his career. Signed a 3-year, $39 million deal. A little bit rich for me, given what he did last season. He had a 1,000-yard season in 2021, but really hasn't played well the last 2 seasons. Chicago was just willing to let him walk. So I think that's an interesting decision. But yes, they also brought in Storm Norton, offensive tackle. He's one of those journeyman offensive tackles, gives you some versatile depth at that position. And they have returned both of the starting tackles, but you can always use depth, especially at the offensive tackle position. They brought in Ray McLeod. But But yeah, I mean, looking at the roster, I mean, Calais Campbell's a big loss. I'm not as concerned about Bud Dupree or Desmond Ritter, or Jeffrey Okudah. I'm very concerned about Cordell Patterson. I think he could have been extremely valuable to the Atlanta Falcons, especially with this new kickoff rule. Like the fact that if he can swing field position based on his ability to return kicks, I think that would have been extremely valuable this season in the NFL. He's no longer on this roster. Where did he go? He is now a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Calais Campbell is now a member of the Miami Dolphins at 38 years old. Jeffrey Okudah signed with the Houston Texans. Bud Dupree is now a member of the Chargers. And Jonnu Smith, who was a very good tight end for this team last season, went to the Miami Dolphins as well, as they lost Mike Gesicki 2 seasons ago. So yeah, we'll see what ends up happening. I mean, Kirk Cousins, it all really stems on if Kirk Cousins can bounce back from that Achilles tear. If he's unable to do that, and he's not the same guy, this will be a disaster. And that's kind of why why he kind of took Michael Penix Jr., right? I mean, as an insurance policy. But I don't think you should have signed Kirk Cousins if you were so concerned about his ability to return from this injury that you're willing to take a quarterback in the first round. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but Kirk Cousins should be good for this team, and he should elevate the ceiling of the Atlanta Falcons. Let's talk about their schedule, and let's do ceiling/floor. I think that their ceiling is winning the NFC South, but that seems like a very generous ceiling. I think there is a real world where they're the number 1 seed in the NFC. I look at the schedule that they have. We don't know what you're going to get from the New Orleans Saints. We haven't done their season preview episode yet. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I mean, Baker Mayfield could go back to old Baker Mayfield. His offensive coordinator is no longer there. Things could regress there in Tampa Bay. The Carolina Panthers, that should be 2 wins. They play a lot of their really tough games outside of that at home. I mean, they get the Pittsburgh Steelers at home. They get the Kansas City Chiefs at home. They play the Seattle Seahawks at home, the Dallas Cowboys at home, the Chargers at home. I mean, they have to go on the road for a very tough game with Philadelphia. But you look at their road schedule, I think that all of those games are winner outs. They can win all those games outside of the Philadelphia Eagles game. I mean, you're talking about this being a 12-win team. I mean, Philly, maybe they go to Philly and lose. Maybe they lose to Kansas City. Maybe they lose to the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe they lose to the Los Angeles Chargers. But I think that's where I got them at. I mean, they could be number 1 seed in the NFC if things really shake out the way that they could for this particular team. When you talk about floor, I think Tampa Bay could still be a juggernaut. I mean, they won the division last season with like 9 wins. I do not think that'll be good enough to win a division this season, at least not this particular division. They had 9. They were 9-8. I think their ceiling is, they win the NFC South, like the floor. That's a really high floor for this team, but that's how much I believe in their Kirk Cousins edition. I believe in the weapons around Kirk Cousins. They could be their ceiling could be the best team in the NFC, at least the number 1 seed in the NFC is record wise. Their floor is winning the NFC South. You may disagree with that. Because, I mean, there are some tough games on the schedule, but as I mentioned, a lot of those games are at home. They don't have to travel to Seattle to play the Seahawks. They get to play them in their own building, and that's a huge advantage. They don't have to go to Arrowhead and play the Kansas City Chiefs. They get to be at home for that matchup. And I look at the final 4 games of their schedule. I mean, or 5 games, really. I mean, depending on what J.J. McCarthy ends up being for the Minnesota Vikings, or Sam Darnold still has that starting job. I mean, you go to Vegas, expect that to be a win. The Giants come to town, you expect to win that game. The Washington Commanders, you go to Washington to play the Commanders. Should be a victory. And then you end the season with a game against the Carolina Panthers. That should also be a victory. So you look at the other 5 games of the schedule, it should be pretty easy wins. But I guess we'll see. If you disagree with me on their ceiling/floor, if you could disagree with any of the takes that I did during this Atlanta Falcons preview episode, please let me know down in the comments section. I do check these comments. I do respond. So if you say something, I will respond back, and I will talk to you, and I will engage. Because this is a podcast. We're a social podcast, and we'd like to talk to our fans. But yeah, this has been our Atlanta Falcons season preview. Thank you very much for joining us here at Prime Sports World. Please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. And if you are doing something for the 4th of July tomorrow, please do it safely, drink responsibly, use fireworks responsibly, and just be safe and have a great holiday. The world is a better place with you in it. I'm David Huffman. Thank you very much for joining us, and we bring the heat. see you guys after the holiday. Actually, we'll probably be back on Friday, running the show on Friday. I haven't completely decided. So just keep an eye out for that content. We run shows almost every single day here at Prime Sports World. And until then, you have a very safe and a very happy holiday. You all have a good night. Stay easy.